deleted social post featuring Angel Reese and Paige Bueckers appearing to make a friendly wager on yesterday's Dream Wings game. Quote, while the social media post was intended to be lighthearted, WNBA players are well aware of the league's policies prohibiting betting on WNBA games and receive training every year reinforcing those policies. We recognize that the post missed the mark, removed it shortly after it was published.
There are two kinds of mistakes a professional sports league can make. The first kind is an honest error, a bad call, a poorly worded statement, a social media post that lands wrong. Those happen. Organizations are run by people, and people miscalculate. The second kind of mistake is far more damaging. It's the kind where the cover-up becomes louder than the original incident, where the attempt to make something disappear only guarantees that everyone keeps talking about it. The WNBA just made the second kind of mistake, and they made it in front of millions of people. It started with a video. The league's own official social media account posted a clip that appeared to show Angel Reese and Paige Bueckers exchanging what sounded unmistakably like the language of a wager connected to an actual WNBA game. Reese, in her post-game setting, laughed and said she'd be requesting her Apple Pay. The league packaged it as entertaining content, pushed it out to their audience, and let it run. Then, almost as quickly as it went up, it came down, deleted, gone, replaced by a statement that used careful, corporate-polished language to describe what happened as a lighthearted moment that missed the mark. And just like that, the WNBA expected everyone to move on. They didn't move on, and the reason they didn't move on has nothing to do with people looking for reasons to attack the league or tear down its players. It has everything to do with one simple fact. The league never answered the only question that actually mattered. Did a real wager exist? After everything that followed, that sentence was never written in any official communication, and that silence is what turned a preventable controversy into a credibility crisis. Let's start at the beginning, because the details matter more than the headlines suggest. The clip that sparked all of this wasn't shot in secret. It wasn't leaked by someone with an agenda. It was published by the WNBA itself on its own verified account as official content. That's the first thing to understand. This wasn't a rogue fan account or a tabloid digging for dirt. The league looked at that footage, decided it was worth sharing, and put it in front of their audience as something worth watching. In the clip, Angel Reese references collecting her Apple Pay after the game. The implication, whether intended seriously or not, was that something financial was riding on the outcome. She didn't sound confused, she didn't correct herself. She laughed, acknowledged Paige Bueckers' performance, and moved on. The whole exchange had the casual energy of two people who understood exactly what they were referencing. Then, hours later, the league deleted the post. Here's where the first layer of suspicion builds. If the exchange was genuinely harmless, if it was nothing more than playful trash talk with zero real meaning behind it, why delete it? Leagues don't typically scrub content from their official accounts because it was too funny or too entertaining. They remove content when someone in the organization looks at it and realizes it creates a problem. The deletion itself was an admission, not necessarily an admission that a real bet existed, but an admission that the clip looked bad enough to justify removal. And that judgment call came from inside the league's own communications team. Then came the statement. The WNBA said the post was lighthearted in intent, that it missed the mark, and that the matter had been addressed internally. They reminded everyone that players receive annual policy training. They noted that even joking conversations about wagering on WNBA games can have negative consequences, and then they stopped talking.
Lets us all know there will be no punishment for Reese or Bueckers' poor source. The WNBA's own Twitter handle, think it's a flex showing these two gambling, deletes it, tells everyone it's lighthearted, and reminds everyone not to gamble as it's against league policy. Say that out loud to yourself.
Read that statement slowly, because there's something extraordinary buried in it.
The league is simultaneously claiming two contradictory things. On one hand, the players knew the rules. They received training every single year specifically covering gambling policy. On the other hand, the exchange was harmless, lighthearted, and not worth detailed public explanation. But those two positions cannot both be true at the same time. If the players knew the rules well enough to understand where the line is, then making public comments that reference collecting payment connected to a game outcome isn't an innocent mistake, it's a decision. And decisions made by informed professionals operating inside a league with strict gambling policies deserve a more serious response than "we talked to them privately and moved on." The statement also did something else worth noting. It framed the principal error as the social media post itself, as though the problem was a content decision made by whoever manages the league's Twitter account. By focusing attention on the post missing the mark, the league subtly shifted responsibility away from the players and toward the account administrator. It's a clever communication strategy, but it doesn't hold up when you watch Angel Reese walk into her post-game press conference and repeat the Apple Pay line, voluntarily, publicly, in front of reporters, hours after the game ended. That moment is what separated this from a simple social media mishap. If the original clip was an isolated thing, a brief exchange captured out of context and blown up by an overeager content team, then Reese repeating the idea in her own press conference makes it something different. It shows the comment wasn't a throwaway line captured at an awkward angle. It was a running idea between the two players, comfortable enough to carry into a media setting. That changes the picture, not necessarily into proof of a completed wager, but into something the league cannot credibly describe as a misunderstanding. The one sentence that would have ended most of this controversy was never written. After reviewing the matter, the league determined that no actual wager occurred and no money changed hands. 7 words that would have separated a legitimate joke from a genuine integrity concern. The WNBA chose not to write those words. That choice, whether intentional or careless, is what kept the story alive. Now let's talk about the two players at the center of this, because their position in the league matters to understanding why the response looked the way it did. Paige Bueckers entered the WNBA carrying more pre-arrival hype than almost any player in the league's history. National recognition, major endorsements, the kind of name value that casual sports fans recognize without following women's basketball closely. She arrived as a designated future face of the franchise, not just her team, but the entire league. Angel Reese brought something equally valuable, but different in nature. Her social media presence, her personal brand, her ability to generate conversation and attention far beyond what her statistics alone would produce. These things made her commercially significant in a way the league recognized immediately. Whether or not you like her style or her public persona, the business reality is that Reese commands attention, and attention in professional sports translates directly into revenue. The WNBA has obvious and legitimate reasons to promote both of them. Every professional league invests in its most marketable personalities. That is not corruption. That is how sports businesses operate. But there is a question sitting underneath the promotion strategy that this controversy forced into the open. Does marketability change accountability? When a player who generates millions in brand value is involved in a rule-adjacent incident, does the institutional response look different than it would for a player with no endorsements, no social following, and no commercial weight? Fans are not being paranoid by asking that question. They're being logical. They watch the league hand out technical fouls to players for reactions that last less than 3 seconds. They watch officiating decisions get defended in detailed public statements. They watch minor incidents involving lower-profile players get addressed with more visible consequences than this situation received. And then they are told that an incident involving the 2 biggest names in the league, posted on the league's own account and repeated in a public press conference, was handled quietly, internally, with no public finding and no announced consequence. The math doesn't look right to them, and telling them to stop doing the math is not a communication strategy. Caitlin Clark's name keeps appearing in this conversation, and it's worth understanding exactly why, because her role here is not what some people assume. Clark was not involved in this incident. She did not make the posts. She was not part of the exchange. She has no direct connection to what Reese and Bueckers said. But her arrival in the WNBA changed the size of the audience watching the league. And a larger audience means a smaller margin for the kind of vague institutional communication the league has historically gotten away with. Before Clark became the story she became, the WNBA operated inside a relatively contained ecosystem. Controversies moved through one news cycle and disappeared. Statements that raised more questions than they answered were accepted because the follow-up audience wasn't large enough to sustain the pressure. That world no longer exists. Millions of newer fans entered the league specifically because of Clark's arrival, and they came in with the expectations of people used to watching major professional sports. Leagues where integrity issues generate detailed public responses, where gambling policy violations produce named consequences, and where "we handled it internally" is the beginning of an explanation, not the end of one. Some longtime WNBA supporters interpret that scrutiny as an attack, and some of it genuinely is. Certain corners of online commentary are hostile, personal, and not interested in fairness. But the majority of the pressure being applied to the league over this incident is not hostile. It is the completely reasonable expectation that a league asking to be evaluated as a major professional sports organization will respond to integrity questions the way major professional sports organizations respond to them. Clark didn't create that expectation. Her popularity revealed that the WNBA's institutional communication had not yet caught up to the standards of the audience it was now reaching. The comparison that keeps surfacing in fan discussions is Calvin Ridley. In 2022, the NFL suspended Ridley for the entire following season after it was confirmed he had placed bets on league games during a period when he was on the non-football injury list. His case involved verified betting activity confirmed through investigation with documented financial transactions. It was a serious violation, and it produced a serious consequence. 1 full season gone. Nobody serious is arguing that what Reese and Bueckers did is identical to what Ridley did. It isn't. Ridley's situation involved confirmed betting activity through a sportsbook. The WNBA situation involves what might be a joke, might be a casual, informal challenge, and might be nothing more than 2 competitive athletes teasing each other the way athletes have since the beginning of organized sports. Treating those 2 scenarios as equivalent would be unfair to the players and intellectually dishonest. But the Ridley comparison isn't being made because fans think these cases are identical. It's being made because it illustrates the principle underneath the rule. Major leagues enforce gambling policies severely, not because every violation is equally serious, but because trust is the actual product being sold. When someone buys a ticket to a game or tunes in to watch a competition, they are purchasing the belief that the outcome is determined by effort, skill, and competitive desire. The moment financial arrangements between players, even small, casual, informal ones, become visible, every play becomes suspect. Every missed shot, every turnover, every decision that might have gone differently. That's the damage that even the appearance of wagering can do. And that's why leagues don't tolerate even the appearance of it. The WNBA's own statement acknowledged this. It said wagering conversations can have negative consequences. Then it declined to name a single consequence. Here's the test that reveals whether the response was proportionate. Replace Reese and Bueckers with different names and watch how the analysis shifts. Take a bench player, someone with no major endorsements, no significant social following, no commercial value to the league's marketing department. Suppose that player walks into a post-game press conference and publicly jokes about collecting Apple Pay from a teammate based on the game's outcome. Does the WNBA handle that quietly, internally, with a statement about the post missing the mark? Or does that player receive something more visible? A fine, a formal warning published in league communications, a disciplinary notice that makes the public record. Now go the other direction. Imagine Clark herself appeared in that clip. Given the size of the audience that follows her, given the intensity of public attention her presence generates, would the league have issued a vague internal resolution and expected the story to die? Or would the scrutiny have forced a more detailed, more transparent response simply because the pressure would have been impossible to absorb otherwise? Those hypotheticals are uncomfortable because they suggest the league's response is shaped by factors that have nothing to do with the conduct itself. Not by whether a rule was violated, not by whether competitive integrity was genuinely threatened, but by which names are attached to the incident and how much institutional cost would come from treating those names the same way less prominent players would be treated. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a pattern that sports leagues have always struggled with, and it becomes visible precisely when organizations refuse to show their work. A credible gambling policy isn't one that produces the same punishment for every case, regardless of context. It's one that applies the same investigative seriousness, produces a public finding, and uses standards that would survive if the names were shuffled. Right now, the Wnba'S response doesn't pass that test. Not because there's proof of corruption, but because the league never provided enough information to demonstrate that it does. What would transparent handling have actually looked like? It's worth spelling this out because one of the defenses of the league's response is that internal investigations don't require public disclosure. That's partially true. Organizations don't owe the public access to private player interviews or confidential investigative files. But sports leagues, particularly ones that publicly partner with betting companies, promote gambling engagement, and profit from the legalized sports betting industry, do owe their audience a basic finding when an integrity question arises. The finding doesn't have to be elaborate. It doesn't require releasing transcripts or naming every person involved in the review. It requires one clear sentence about the central question. After reviewing the available information, the league either found evidence of a real wager or it didn't. That conclusion, not the process, just the conclusion, is what the public is owed when the league's own account posts content that creates the impression of game-linked wagering and then deletes it. Beyond the finding, a proportionate response was available. If investigators concluded that no real bet existed, the league could have said so directly, issued a formal warning documented to both players about public conduct related to wagering language, and published clearer guidance for future situations. That would have acknowledged the seriousness of the optics without manufacturing a suspension for what might genuinely have been a joke. It would have protected the players from unfair punishment while protecting the audience from the suspicion that star power had quietly rewritten the rulebook. Instead, the league chose the path that managed short-term discomfort at the cost of long-term credibility. Announce as little as possible, absorb the criticism, and wait for the next story to take over the timeline.
The problem with that strategy is that it doesn't actually end the conversation. It postpones it and makes the next version worse. Because now the WNBA has set a visible standard, not a written one, not an official policy change, but a demonstrated behavioral standard, one that every future incident will be measured against. Suppose a role player on a struggling franchise makes a joking reference to a point spread after a game. Suppose a coach laughs about covering an over-under in a sideline interview. Suppose two players on different teams exchange messages about a friendly bet that gets screenshotted and circulated. Each of those situations will now be evaluated in comparison to this one. Fans, journalists, and critics will ask, why does this case deserve a more visible response than the Reese Bueckers situation received? And the league will have no clean answer. Because the standard it set here was vague, the next application of that standard will produce exactly the same argument, that discipline depends on who you are, not what you did. That is the most damaging outcome of this entire controversy. not the original clip, not Reese's press conference comment, not even the deleted post. The most damaging outcome is the precedent, an unwritten but clearly demonstrated rule that internal resolution is available to the league's most commercially valuable players, and that public accountability is something the WNBA deploys selectively rather than consistently. Once that perception exists, it survives every news cycle. It gets applied to officiation decisions. It gets applied to scheduling choices. It gets applied to media coverage and broadcast treatment and roster moves. The gambling incident becomes the reference point for a broader narrative about how the league operates, and that narrative is far harder to correct than any individual controversy. To be fair to both players, and fairness requires saying this clearly, nothing in the available evidence establishes that Angel Reese and Paige Bueckers engaged in serious gambling misconduct. The clips do not prove a completed financial transaction. They do not establish that either player attempted to influence the outcome of a game. They do not show communication with sportsbooks, outside parties, or anyone with a financial stake in the result. The most honest interpretation of the available material is that two competitive, trash-talking athletes made casual references to a friendly challenge in a public setting without fully processing the optics of doing so in an industry where wagering language carries specific regulatory weight. That interpretation is not naive. Athletes make informal competitions out of everything: dinner tabs, golf rounds, practice shooting contests, workout challenges. The competitive instinct doesn't switch off when the game ends. An informal "you owe me" between teammates or rivals is as old as competitive sports itself. The problem is not that Reese and Bueckers have competitive instincts. The problem is that they expressed those instincts in language that overlapped with gambling terminology in a public media setting while playing in a league that explicitly prohibits wagering on its own games and trains its players on that prohibition annually. Context matters. A private conversation between two friends is different from a comment made in front of cameras around an official league game. Annual policy training exists specifically because that distinction matters. It exists to help players understand that casual language in a professional setting carries weight that the same language wouldn't carry elsewhere. The training is not symbolic, it's a professional obligation, and the league's own statement confirmed the players had received it. So where does this leave the WNBA? The league is sitting at a decision point that it has so far chosen to avoid acknowledging. Option 1 is to leave the statement as written, say nothing further, and rely on the news cycle moving to the next story. That option preserves short-term comfort, but accepts the permanent cost: a documented public incident involving its two biggest names, handled with a statement that raised more questions than it answered, with no public finding and no announced consequence. That record exists now. It cannot be unwritten.
Option 2 requires more institutional courage, but it's the only one that actually resolves the underlying problem. Clarify the central factual question. Explain whether the review found evidence of a real wager. If it didn't, say that directly and publish the finding. Acknowledge that the player's public conduct created an optics problem that warranted a formal response. Issue that response on the record and commit to applying the same standard the next time a similar situation arises, regardless of who is involved. That approach doesn't throw Reese and Bueckers under the bus. It treats them as professional athletes operating under professional rules, which is exactly what they are and exactly what the league needs them to be treated as if it wants to be taken seriously at the level it is asking to compete. The WNBA is not a small regional league operating outside of public scrutiny anymore. It is a growing professional organization with national television contracts, major corporate partnerships, significant attendance figures, and an audience that includes millions of people who arrived with expectations shaped by watching the NFL, NBA, and every other league that has spent decades building credibility around the idea that integrity is non-negotiable. Those audiences will not accept "we handled it internally" as a complete answer. They never have. And the WNBA's own statements about transparency and accountability ring hollow when the organization applies a different standard to its own conduct than the one it advertises to the public. The most important thing this controversy exposed is not about Angel Reese or Paige Bueckers specifically. It's about institutional character. The way an organization handles a preventable mistake under pressure tells you more about how it actually operates than anything it says in a press release about its values. The WNBA had every opportunity to turn this into a demonstration of exactly the kind of serious, accountable professionalism it wants to be associated with. Delete the post, release a clear finding, announce a proportionate response, and move forward with a documented standard that applies to everyone equally. That sequence of events produces a one-day story, maybe two, then it's done. Instead, the league issued a statement designed to close the conversation without actually answering it, and in doing so, it guaranteed that the conversation would continue, louder, more suspicious, and with less benefit of the doubt than the situation might have originally deserved. Transparency is not just a PR strategy. It is the mechanism by which sports leagues protect both their players and themselves. When a league withholds the basic factual resolution of an integrity question, it doesn't protect anyone. It creates a vacuum, and vacuums in sports controversies fill up with speculation, comparison, and cynicism every single time. Angel Reese and Paige Bueckers deserve fair treatment. Fair treatment means being held to the same standards as every other player in the league, no harsher, but also no softer. The WNBA's current statement doesn't demonstrate that standard was met. It demonstrates that the league knows how to use corporate language to make questions feel answered without actually answering them. And that skill, useful as it may be in a quiet week, becomes a liability the moment the audience is paying close enough attention to notice the gap between what was said and what was actually explained. The gap here is impossible to miss. Was there a real wager? The league still hasn't said. That answer exists. Someone inside that organization knows it. The decision not to share it was a choice, and that choice is the controversy, more than anything either player said on camera.